to obey the speed limit, and to set your thermostats to save fuel. Every act of energy conservation like this is more than just common sense. I tell you, it is an act of patriotism.
Oh, for God's sake.
Our nation must be fair to the poorest among us.
So what was the most dismal aspect of the Carter years? Was it inflation? Was it gas lines? Disco music? Those fine American-made cars like the Pinto and the plush Corinthian leather of the Cordoba? Or maybe hostages in a radicalized Iran?
Governor Reagan again, typically, is a
or perhaps losing in a landslide to a B movie actor.
There you go again.
No, I think we've all forgotten the most dismal aspect of the Carter years, and it came in six-packs. And they looked like this. The late 1970s were a dark time for light beer. Breweries were closing or merging, reducing consumer choice. By the late 1970s, the U.S. was down to fewer than 100 breweries. Beer makers began making lots of specialty beers, some of them pretty dubious. Into the breach came Billy Carter with his eponymous label, made chiefly by the Falls City Brewing Company in Louisville, Kentucky. It wasn't well received. Looking back, it seems incredible now. Jimmy Carter, the elder statesman, gets lots of love these days, like the Nobel Peace Prize and the unofficial title as America's best ex-president ever. He even has a nuclear attack submarine named for him, spreading terror to swamp rabbits everywhere. But Billy and his suds, not so much. Now, we all know that Jimmy Carter deregulated the airlines and trucking industries, but did you know this Southern Baptist president also deregulated home beer brewing, which led to the craft beer and nanobrewery revolution? But somehow, Billy Beer didn't prosper from this change. The Falls City Brewing Company went bankrupt, and Billy Beer ended up on eBay, mostly unsold and unloved. And if Billy Beer wasn't any good to begin with, could it possibly be drinkable after all this time? Clearly the time had come to consult experts.
I think it was a joke at the time, but today we think of it as much worse than a joke.
This is Martin Morse Wooster, an award-winning beer writer based in Maryland, and obviously qualified as an expert on the subject. We caught up with Martin recently in Washington, D.C. to cover the territory of the dark ages of light beer in the 1970s.
Billy Beer was a gimmick beer, and it was put out by breweries that weren't making a good product anyway, and that's why it tanked. It was no different than your average cheap lager, or as we professionals say, cost-conscious, value-minded consumers who demand value in their alcohol consumption. I think the beer lasted for less than a year, and it's just remembered as another horrible example of late 70s horrible beer. You know, the 70s were the worst because there wasn't much variety. No one knew what good beer was because there wasn't much of it to be had.
But Martin still hasn't told us what we want to know, which is, can we still drink the stuff?
I would think drinking Billy Beer would be hideous.
Well, clearly there was only one thing to do at this point. Time to gather up the posse and head on down to the Cambria Brewing Company to take up the subject with Aaron Wharton, Cambria's premier brewmaster. Hey Aaron, hey Steve, got a question?
Sure.
You got any Billy Beer?
Yeah, I've got some open right here.
That's plenty. That is surprisingly good. Who would have thought it? Actually, it isn't that bad.
This is surprisingly good.
This is a human rights violation.
Oh, God.
You didn't see.
Oh, man.
Steel cans.
This is awful. Can I have some more?
Time, and what we'll do is,
You want me to
we'll just
have bad taste buds?
I know. Well, pretty clearly, we're not fooling anyone here about the drinkability of Billy beer. Maybe a better way of conveying its character on video is to attach it to the memory of our favorite pairs of contrasting Carter-era figures. Some were sour, some were sweet, some light, some filling, some sensible, some, well, you make the call. Like Jody Powell or Pat Cadell, Paul Volcker or Burt Lance, Rudolph Bultmann or Billy Graham, Andrew Young or Warren Christopher, Brzezinski or Vance. No, not this Brzezinski or Vance. That Brzezinski and Vance. In any case, let's try it out again with our panel of tasters. So, Cy Vance or is it Big Brzezinski?
Big Brzezinski. Definitely.
Jody Powell or Pat Cadell?
Pat Cadell.
So, Billy Graham or Rudolph Bultmann?
Definitely Rudolph Bultmann. Time to demythologize this stuff.
Well, Andrew Young or Warren Christopher?
Definitely Warren Christopher. Okay, so by now it's clear that we really don't want to try to bring back anything from the 70s. Certainly not the beer, and probably not the civil servants either. But at least we can give Jimmy Carter and his hapless brother a shout out for their unintended role in reviving American beer.
One thing that happened during the Carter administration that was positive was that home brewing was legalized.
So here's to Billy and Jimmy.
But by legalizing homebrew, you got people who are interested in brewing, and the ones that were really committed to it wanted to become professional brewers. And those are the people who one started their own breweries, and two had enough knowledge to be able to resolve technical questions.
Well, that would be people like Aaron Wharton at the Cambria Beer Company, our host for this misadventure.
Since March of 2012, my wife and I started it. We were homebrewing for about 15 years before we decided to go professional.
So, Aaron, what in your mind makes a good beer?
I'd say a beer has to have character, whether that's a malt character, a yeast, or a hop character. It has to have one of those three that stand out, but not too much, because imagine it's like a three-legged stool and you've got bitterness, alcohol, and sweetness. You can't be sitting way over to one side because that's not comfortable. Same as drinking a beer, it's not going to be that good. You can be in the center of all three of those and be balanced.
But it seems like a lot of people like really hoppy beers these days. Is that right?
That is correct. Yeah, the West Coast really took the IPAs and made it their own within the last, probably the last decade.
So what do you got on offer right now, and what's coming up?
What we have right now today is number one, we have our American Sour Ale. That is an intensely sour ale with hints of lemon, some citrus, a little bit of a vinegar and lactic acid backbone. We have our Slabtown Pale Ale. That's a classic West Coast style pale ale. And we have our Comatose, which is our triple IPA to satisfy those people who just can't get enough hops. It's an 11% beer with about 125 IBUs.
Hence the name Comatose.
And what we have coming up is we have an American Wheat Ale, and we're doing a variation of that, which will be an orange American Wheat Ale. So we'll have some orange flavoring into it as well. And then we're going to brew our porter, our stout, our amber, IPA, and pale ale again to get those back up on the board.
Neat.
The first craft brewer, well, it depends on whether or not you consider Anchor the first craft brewery, which it probably was, because Anchor was founded in 1896, never formally went out of business, but if Fritz Maytag had not bought it in 1965, it almost certainly would have died. Anchor was probably the first modern craft brewery. The first original one was New Albion, which came along in 1976. By the late 70s, you see the starts of some of the bigger ones. Sierra Nevada dates from 1979 or 80. Sam Adams from the early 80s. Boulder Brewing from 1979. And New Albion died but sort of was resurrected as Mendocino. So there's a book called The Great Beer Trek, which some people in 1982 went around the country and looked at breweries. And it's really interesting for showing what the state of beer was at that time. For example, Schaefer was still around, and the Schaefer who started running the company in 1927 was still running it. But Schaefer folded very shortly thereafter.